Hey guys, it's Graham. Welcome back to Truckerman Reads. Today I finished the audiobook of Children of Húrin by J.R.R. Tolkien, edited by Christopher Tolkien. I specifically chose the audiobook because this one is narrated by Christopher Lee, who played Saruman in the films all those years ago. This is not my first go at this particular book. Probably back in 2017 or 18 or so, my friend Dan, who is big into the Tolkien lore, recommended that I try it out. But I jumped in and I had no idea what was going on. I wasn't following any of it. And I looked up kind of some details about it online. And obviously, with it being a book that happens in the middle of the Silmarillion, there's a lot more contextual information going on that if you know it, it'll give the story some weight and some impact. And I didn't read the Silmarillion all the way through until last year. And now that I have a greater appreciation for everything that kind of brackets this particular story. Uh, the Children of Húrin is a tragedy. I'm sure there's a lot more analysis that other people have done out on YouTube and on the internet. And there's probably even some contextual stuff that Tolkien himself wrote about it, and I might discover that when I get through reading the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. But I wanted to instead kind of offer up my own unique analysis on it. The story is about a guy named Turin Turambar, whose family is basically cursed by Morgoth, by the devil figure of Middle-earth, to basically always have everything suck. And it's not that Turin Turambar is, I'm just going to say Turin is the main character. It's not like he is particularly possessed of like an inexhaustible supply of virtue. He's got his own faults, but even when he tries to do the right thing, it blows up in his face. And sometimes it's directly because Morgoth and his agents are surrounding him and doing things just to screw with him when things are going well. There's one particular instance that reminded me of the story of Oedipus Rex, which I haven't really read since probably my World Lit class in high school, but I remember the general gist of it. Like this guy had a prophecy made about him, and he knew about it, and he tried to avoid it, and it still blew up in his face. There's some similarity between Oedipus Rex and Turin, not least of which is the fact that through trickery of Morgoth, Turin ends up marrying his own sister. She knows, or she knew who he was, but she had like her mind wiped. And Turin met her, fell in love with her, married her, and everything. And then, like at the worst possible moment, Morgoth restored his sister's memories to her, and she was pregnant with a kid of theirs. And she's like, "Oh hell no!" And she ends up like drowning herself tragically. And that's not the only bad thing that happens to Turin throughout the course of this story. You guys know that I'm generally always in pursuit of positive stories. I want something uplifting. I want something that makes me feel good. And this is like no holds barred, a story of a tragedy. But as I was listening to it, and as I was reflecting on what I read of this particular chapter in the Silmarillion last year, I thought, what is it that makes me want to get through this? It's not just that it's Tolkien. I've abandoned Tolkien books before for various reasons. But why did I keep reading about Turin? And I think it's because I have read the Silmarillion and I get the general long perspective that Tolkien had for his legendarium and where a story like this fits in. If you go all the way back to the beginning, to the Vala Quenta, to the story of basically the gods making the world, to oversimplify it, and then you look at everything Morgoth did to screw it up, you see that's kind of the way things have always been. And the stories of the first and second age are about misery and suffering, and how even when people strive to do good and to assert their own way of life and to do righteous things, Morgoth and his agents are going to be there to just destroy it. Turin is a creature of passion, and sometimes those passions were virtuous, and other times, they led him to make regrettable decisions. But the fact that Morgoth always had his thumb on the scales guaranteed, according to the curse, that his life was going to be tragic, and that anybody close to him who loved him was going to suffer, and then he was going to suffer last of all. But in the microcosm of the Silmarillion, of the whole long scope of the story that would then conclude in the Third Age with the Lord of the Rings and everything, I think it's reflective of Tolkien's own worldview, especially when it comes to his faith, that mortality is a period of trial and suffering. The point is not to suffer, but the guarantee is that you will suffer. And Turin's life especially was just defined by that guarantee of suffering. So what is the point then of this tragedy? For me, my takeaway is that the tragedy itself is not final. For Turin, it was, at least in mortality. But again, taking it in the greater context of the Silmarillion, there were plenty of characters that died brutal, tragic deaths, entire nations that died brutal, tragic deaths. Even high-ranking, esteemed children of the Eldar, of the elves, even of Ilúvatar's firstborn children. They were pretty much guaranteed suffering, and then when they died, they would be found in the halls of Mandos. Again, to make an imperfect but parallel comparison, it's kind of like Valhalla. It's the entryway to divinity, to heaven, to the final judgment, to the reward, to the restoration of things, to where basically God comes in and makes everything okay, and people are judged and assessed for the net total sum of their actions. It's not a perfect comparison, but I think it matters that Tolkien never specifically defined what was on the other side of the halls of Mandos, what happened on the other end of mortality, because the point wasn't for us in mortality to completely understand that, but rather to strive for it and to endure through tragedy and try to do everything that we could to thrive in spite of it. So the story of the tragedy of Turin, of the children of Húrin, is that for some people your life is just going to suck. And if that's the case, and not everything in your life sucks, then maybe you've got more cause to be grateful than you realize. I think everybody listening to this can probably say with accuracy that there are things in their life that they wish were different, but you read a story of somebody like Turin, and you can be grateful that, like, at least the most evil of the anti-lesser gods is not personally seeing to your destruction and misery, despite how bad you think your life is. Yeah, you got a parking ticket this morning and you were not illegally parked, but at least this guy didn't trick you into marrying your own sister and killing your best friend and all the other bad and tragic things that Turin ended up doing throughout the course of this tale. Like a lot of the other stories that became chapters in the Silmarillion, they were smaller things that Tolkien worked on and rewrote several times throughout the course of his life. And this is where the editing by Christopher is an essential characteristic of the final version of it, because they were all published posthumously. They were things that Christopher curated and put together. And the single chapter about the life of Turin in the Silmarillion is almost like a Wikipedia summary of this larger version of the story. If you listen to or read the story of Beren and Luthien, there are various different versions of it in that book, as well as selections of poetry that Tolkien wrote. The Children of Húrin is not like that. It is a very complete story all on its own, but I think if you want to appreciate it, you've got to see where it fits and why it matters as a single story in the larger spread of stories in the Silmarillion. Finally, obviously my decision to listen to this as an audiobook was vindicated because Christopher Lee's performance was just excellent. A couple of years ago, new editions of the Lord of the Rings audiobooks came out, narrated by Andy Serkis, and obviously he did a fantastic job. He performed the role of Gollum when that character popped up in those books. But it was also great to see his interpretation of other characters, like when he voiced Gandalf and when he voiced Aragorn. He wasn't trying to be Ian McKellen. He wasn't trying to be Viggo Mortensen. He was doing his own interpretation of those characters. And while many narrators can be said to just read a book or narrate a book, Christopher Lee performed this book. He was one of the most unique and inimitable talents of his time. And I just think it's cool that as an appreciator of art, and especially as an appreciator of the corpus of Tolkien's work, I got to live in a time where I saw his movies on screen, bringing the role of Saruman to life, and that he would then lend his talents to the performance of this book, even if its subject matter is very brutal and tragic. I made it to the end because his performance made it worth enjoying. So if you're a fan of Tolkien, and especially if you're familiar with the larger narrative of the Silmarillion, I can recommend The Children of Húrin, especially the audiobook narrated by Christopher Lee. Thanks for watching. Drive safe, or I'll run you over on. I'm just kidding. Train tracks. Drive safe. See you out there.